you check the children. Show a little mad sometimes.
Hi, I'm Chucky. Wanna play?
Sometimes. That is what
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
Bienvenidos, Fright fans, and welcome to the Horror Show. I'm Jaime and Fuego, so very stoked to be back here in the studios, the Horror Show Channel studios, because, yeah, much like with when I saw ISS earlier this year, I think it was in like the first month or two of the year, the International Space Station film, I am here to check out and review another science fiction thriller with a little bit of horror. We did a trailer reaction to this, if I'm not mistaken, but yes, this one is entitled Slingshot, and so unbeknownst to me at the time when I actually jumped into the theater to check this out, I did not know that this was from Mikael Hofstrom, I believe his name is, and so, yeah, he was the director of one of the greatest adaptations of a Stephen King story in 1408 with John Cusack and Samuel L. Jackson, and this film similarly has some serious star power. You've got Lawrence Fishburne, I mean, Morbius himself, obviously, tons of other things over the years in his illustrious career. Then you have Casey Affleck, who, I'm trying to remember if he actually won the Academy Award for Best Actor for Gone Baby Gone that his brother Ben directed, or if he was just nominated, but yes, very esteemed in his own right. You've also got Tomer Capon, I believe his name is, and he's Frenchie from The Boys, and so that's like our main trio in this. You've also got Emily Beecham, I think her name is. She's done tons of things over the years, Hail Caesar, Into the Badlands, so serious star power, obviously, great director in tow, and yet with this being released at the end of August, kind of get the feeling that the studio did not have a lot of faith in it. I think they did change the title at one point for this, but, you know, overall thoughts, I wasn't so hot on this flick for the first two acts, okay? So the first two acts were a tedious love story of sorts, and it's doing the whole, you know, flashing back and forth, you know, my time on Earth before, you know, and then, you know, now when I'm up on either the space station or on the spaceship or on the base, I mean, you're getting some vibes of Moon, which is one of my favorites of this particular, where, you know, the isolation aspect and how, you know, the paranoia and the second guessing yourself. You see all of this in the trailer, and so I'll get into it a little more properly once we hit the story and all that other stuff. But man, I gotta say, the third act redeems this movie significantly and actually lived up to Mikael Hofstrom and just not just his directing prowess, but the fact that he really got some solid performances out of these actors, and the fact that, you know, the chemistry amongst all three of them, and the, you know, you're second guessing right along with the Casey Affleck character and with a couple of the others as well as to what we're encountering. Is it actually transpiring, or, as is also alluded to in the trailer, are we just messed up from these, you know, from these meds that they give us when we're going into this, like, hypersleep and going into these, like, cryostasises? Because in getting into full-on, like, story, I guess, and I'll round out my overall thoughts as I segue into that, because this is another one of those stories where, okay, we have to get to Titan. Titan is the, I'm trying to remember if it's the, if it's one of the moons of Jupiter or Saturn, but I believe it's Jupiter. But, so, yeah, there are important resources that are going to help save the human race. So it's not trying to, like, populate Titan, which I've seen in various science fiction stories over the year. This is one where they're trying to actually harvest the methane, I believe. And so they're going to use that for, I think, cleaner energy or something back on Earth. And so it does touch into aspects of, you know, crude oils and, you know, using these bad energy sources, or at least bad according to many. I'm not trying to get into any sort of political or social discussions or whatnot, but, you know, it does deal with those themes of global warming because of the sort of energy sources that mankind is dependent upon. This takes place in, I want to say, like 2032, 2034, something of that nature. So it's in the not too distant future. And yeah, so Casey Affleck is on this mission along with Lawrence Fishburne and a couple, and, you know, Frenchie. I'll just keep calling him Frenchie from The Boys because he's so great on that show, and I've seen him in a few things, you know, here and there, but that's what everybody is going to recognize him from. And so you've got that standout trio between the three of them. They're the ones who are on this ship that is on its way to Titan, and it's going to take a slingshot on the rings of Saturn, and that's going to allow them to, you know, get the rest of the way, kind of, you know, like propel them a little bit forward. So that is one of the big detriments in the overall thoughts that ties in with the story, is the fact that, you know, it's highbrow in some of the I guess, like, social and intellectual and sort of the pathos of the character. That's where it's more highbrow. In the actual, like, science fiction aspect of it, this is a little more on the lowbrow side, because there are a number of scenes in this movie, especially early on, that are utterly laughable, almost, because it's, you know, it's almost exposition for the audience if you don't know about the idea of slingshotting from Saturn, if you don't, because you have all of these, you know, people in the space program sitting there, and they're watching this huge PowerPoint presentation that Emily Beecham's character is putting on, and it's much more so for the audience, man, because there's no way in hell that all of the people working, you know, for NASA would need this sort of instruction. You know, it's like spoon feed. And there's a few other bits with where the tech is supposed to be, you know, like on like around 10 years in the future, 8 to 10 years, whatever it is. And yet it's like, you know, blah, blah, successful. And you have like a little flashing thing on the screen. So, I mean, it can't all be like Prometheus as far as just the tech looking incredible. This is very obviously a lower budgeted sort of genre film. But so, you know, from that essence of the filmmaking standpoint, that was one of the detriments. And also the fact that, you know, Casey Affleck and the Emily Beecham character have this kind of love story thing going on. I'm trying to remember some of the others. Where was it the astronaut's wife, or was it, or was that the horror one with Johnny Depp? I don't know, but I've seen this concept in tons of films where, you know, husband goes off to space, or, you know, the lover, partner, whatever it may be, goes off to space. And, you know, even the Adam Sandler movie recently, I think that was on Netflix, where he's remembering aspects of his life back on Earth. So this is not, it's a little derivative in that particular bit. But the third act, which is where the second guessing from the trailer really ramps up and becomes significantly more interesting. And I still don't necessarily know if it's worthy of a theatrical experience, but it is worthy of a watch, because the third act is really tight and really powerful, and kind of, to use another cliche, keeps you on the edge of your seat. It really does. So, because, you know, you're guessing along with the character about the nature of what is really going on. And the person I saw this film with, they gave a prediction near the end of the movie. I had a prediction of my own, and it, well, I can't spoil anything, but it does keep you guessing, and I really do appreciate that. And that's actually where the third act is where it does veer into the most horror that we get in this film, because it is a lot of unnerving, like, thriller sort of setup, but there is a kind of an essence of body horror. There is some conflict amongst crew members that I believe was in the trailer as well, that does, you know, veer into this excuse me, this sort of horror aspect. I'm trying to think of other things that I could mention as far as overall thoughts, but overall thoughts and story, I think I've said about as much as I really can here. The acting is good. I saw some people saying, because this was the screen unseen through AMC a few days before it actually hit theaters this past weekend, and they were like, Casey Affleck looks all, you know, stoned in this movie and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, do you not remember that it's in the trailers, and they even say it throughout the movie, that you are experiencing side effects from the drugs that we have given you to put you into hypersleep? So of course his performance is going to be more dazed and disoriented and all this different stuff. So I felt like that criticism was pretty craptastic, honestly. What I didn't buy into as much, though, as far as the acting goes, if I'm going to, you know, give like a malo, as I used to say in Fuego-tainment, you know, a bad would be the fact that I didn't really buy the chemistry that much between Casey Affleck and between Emily Beecham. They're supposed to have this, it's like a love of sorts that's blossoming between the two of them, but yet duty calls and not supposed to be involved because, you know, they're both working with the program and in separate sectors, and the whole conflict of interest. You don't want the distraction for a mission of this magnitude. So, and yet still, you know, there's one scene in particular where it's kind of coming to a head, because it does the time jump thing, you know, between, you know, the currency in space, the current state of what's going down within the narrative, and then the flashbacks to, you know, when they're first meeting each other and whatnot. The romance didn't work for me very much. It was, or at least until certain things started to kind of coalesce in the third act. But for the most part, the romance didn't really work for me. And from the performance standpoint, those were where Casey Affleck, and now I know he's supposed to be this loner character, you know, only child syndrome, as he says at one particular point. So, you know, tougher to express feelings maybe or whatever. But she's kind of bearing her soul to him. And he's like, I experience things. And she's like, what things? And he's like, you know, and you're like, what? So, yeah, some of that stuff didn't work, but I really like Lawrence Fishburne, because he, very similar to the Capone character, Frenchie, you're wondering the motivation and what is the agenda, what is the angle that these particular characters. But that's the thing, because everything is kind of a whodunit, or just a big question mark for Casey Affleck's character. It's very much the unreliable narrator, and I like those kind of stories when executed well, and especially in the third act. That's where the performances are amped significantly. And as far as the actual filmmaking goes, the space shots are cool, but it's really the set design being so kind of lower budget of their ship itself. It's mostly just like corridors and stuff, and there's not a lot of bells and whistles to them. Even like some of the communicators they're using at times, although it does play into the story a little bit, like, how are you talking without a delay and things of that nature, back into the unreliable narrator sort of bit. So yeah, the set designs were not particularly impressive, but some of the space stuff was cool. But then I'm comparing it to Alien Romulus, where the space stuff looked freaking great recently when we saw the newest from that franchise. And so I don't know, man. We get a little bit of blood, not like full on gore, but there is a pretty interesting hallucination scene that I think was in the trailer of a bit of body horror, which was kind of cool. But yeah, I mean, nothing that revolutionary as far as, solid camera work from our cinematographer, but once again, when you're in enclosed spaces, it's going more so for claustrophobia, so you're not going to have as much fluid camera movement at times. It's much more like trying to, feel the walls closing in these enclosed spaces and stuff. The music was one of the more puzzling things in this movie, and I feel like it was, in hindsight and consideration after the fact, deliberately trying to serve the narrative, because we've got... we have a lot of like 60s-ish, 70s sort of stuff. Like, you've got some Kinks in there, and you're like, man, somebody in, like 2032 or 34 or whatever it is, they're weightlifting to, All Day and All the Night by the Kinks. I was like, that's kind of a peculiar choice. And yet I know throwback for certain people is a big thing, myself included. So I'm not here to talk crap, but I just wonder if in that era, like almost like around 10 years from now, if that would still be a thing. But then Lawrence Fishburne's character, he's singing Don't Let Me Be Misunderstood a couple different times in this movie. And so it's not just an indicator of his character, because him, along with Frenchie, along with even Casey Affleck, you're wondering, what their motive is, as I said earlier, what angle they're trying to play. And also, is perception reality? What could I potentially be mistaking, and everything. And so, just don't let me be misunderstood. Things are being misunderstood. You don't know what's real, that sense of uncertainty. So I could see why that would be kind of the theme song of the film in a lot of ways. But, for my money, it's just a little too on the nose. And so, yeah, I guess that really wraps up my thoughts of Slingshot, guys. I wouldn't recommend rushing out to the theater to see it, but I would say keep it on your radars for once it does hit the home streaming of whatever outlet it actually makes its way to. And this is actually one that maybe a matinee in theaters, definitely not like your full 12 or 15 bucks or anything of that nature, but this is definitely like a theater matinee sort of situation, or wait to streaming, or, it's worth a, $5.99 VOD rent or something, or if you've got a date or whatever, because there is kind of that romantic angle, even if it didn't work as well for me. Yeah, they dropped it, I wouldn't say $19.99 PVOD or anything of that nature, but I dug Slingshot, especially because of the fact that it felt like a tale of two movies for the first 2/3, but the third act redeemed it. It genuinely did, and the ending is debatable, and I appreciate the fact that when I walked out of this theater with my companion for this viewing, we were debating, even where they seem like they make the ending relatively clear cut, there's still aspects of debate. Okay, you're like, well, if this is what was really happening, was this aspect real, or was it imagined? Because it is very much one of those situations of ambiguity at times where you don't necessarily know, and even the ending, it's satisfying while still being kind of open-ended without spoiling too much. So I don't know, man. I ended up digging this movie. Very solid 3, and yeah, give it a whirl if you feel so inclined, because there isn't enough science fiction that is of this lower mid sort of budget tier that we get the chance to see in theaters. So I extend the grande gracias, everybody. I've been Jaime and Fuego. You can find me personally on social media sectors: Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, is all that other stuff. Check out Horror Show Cecil on YouTube. He does all kinds of great comic reviews and stuff on there. Yeah, the liking, sharing, subscribing here. It means a hell of a lot. We appreciate it. And if you have actually seen this movie, because I don't think it's going to make any money this weekend, I'm one of the few who went out and saw it, with my guest. And I enjoyed it. I ended up enjoying it. This movie, dare I say, won me over by the time it was finishing. And so all too often we see flicks where they start out promising and then they kind of peter off. This one did kind of the opposite. I was a little just ho-hum until it really ramped up in the third act, and I ended up, pretty satisfied with this one. So in any event, everybody, if you have seen it, leave your thoughts below. And until next time, Freight fans, from myself, Cecil, Robert, the girls, the entire gang, remember, stay scared.